Wishing on stars. Wishing on stars. When I was little, I loved to wish on stars. And I loved this one right over here. You kind of go over and make your wish. Right here on the wishing star. Now, I remember sometimes my mom would overhear things I was wishing for. She would perhaps get a little worried when I asked for a family of gerbils. Or the pony wish, right? The pony. Sometimes after a fight with my brother, I might say something like, "Oh, I wish he would fall off the planet." And he might say something about me. And my mom was always kind of like, and she'd come over to us and she'd say with real concern, "Be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for." And I remember I was like, "Oh, do I have to worry about what I wish for? Could they actually come true?" I mean, I remember kind of having that moment like, oh my, be careful what you wish for. My mother very definitely had a sense that wishes, when we wish, perhaps when we pray, when we ask the universe or God or the cosmos to bring something, manifest something into our lives, what we're inviting is somehow empower them to come into our world. So be careful what you wish, my mother would say. Well, as I was thinking about this and thinking about wishing on stars and this wonderful image for Christmas, I began to think, the ancient Israelites, the Hebrew people, they were really wishing something into being. And the powerfulness of their wishes and their longing and their prayers brought a Messiah. But I'm not sure it was the one they were wishing for. I'm not sure it was the one they expected. And that happens sometimes with wishes. We ask for something to be, and it doesn't quite always turn out the way we maybe expected it in detail, and yet somehow our wish is answered in spite of ourselves. And I think for the ancient Hebrews that may have been what happened. Because so much of the imagery we have from the prophets like Isaiah, from the Old Testament, really set up an expectation for a Messiah that is pretty fiery. This Messiah that they want has a flaming sword of justice, can whack down entire nations of people, can cast them into oblivion, rise victorious as a mighty king over all nations, and is a huge warrior king. They want liberty from their enemies, and this is the image they are seeking to provoke. And Isaiah really worked hard at trying to get a king kind of like that, in the way that he was trying to nurture and form David as the first king over what had been sort of loosely affiliated bunches of families and tribes. He wants that Messiah, and I think for Isaiah, he really thought, kind of like a Merlin moment, that he could make that out of David. And he tried, but he was disappointed. He got the king he wished for, he got a king, but not the one he expected, that he really wanted. Because David, Isaiah was very orthodox. He really was into we are a pure race, a purity people. We eat a certain way. We have laws that keep us in covenant with God. And if you hang out with anybody who's not that, that's not good. And David hung out with all kinds of people like that. And he wanted lots of war. Isaiah was like, let's whack them down. Let's whack the enemy. And David was a little bit more kind of popular at times. And not necessarily, wasn't quite that victorious mighty king with a flaming sword that Isaiah really wanted. And God is king. But he wasn't very happy. So when Isaiah is writing and we're hearing this, we have to understand we have a bit of a disappointed guy. So now he's going through that version and he's really, I'm going to get it right now. You can almost hear him saying, I'm going to be so specific. The Messiah that I want, that I foresee is coming, is going to bring healing, it's going to bring new life, and the images are very strong like that, but he still gets one in there. Even in the reading we got in there, he still gets this is clear. Well, over the generations then of people looking and praying for Messiah, looking for the prophet that might look like the Orthodox Isaiah, right? Waiting for that person to come. Well, first they get John. They've been praying for the prophet to do the announcing. And John comes along, and he is not what they expected, right? Oh my gosh. And the old tradition of prophets, these are people who are mighty, and that whole reference that Jesus makes to the white robes, that's how they would have been adorned, almost, keeping company with kings, as it were, in the courts of kings. Well-groomed, very well thought of, meaning all that cultural esteem imagery, right? Oh no, John is not that. John is wearing camel's hair, he's eating bugs. Ugh. And he doesn't care what anybody thinks about him. He doesn't care what his own Hebrew people think of him. He is not interested in their cultural currency at all. In fact, John, as the son of a high priest, was entitled to be instructed and become a high priest himself, and he utterly rejects it. Any parent ever have that happen to you? I wished for children, and look what happened. Okay? Well, he definitely didn't fulfill the expectations of his parents. And he didn't fulfill the expectations of the Roman Empire to behave. He was outside all of these cultural realms, preaching of God. So we should know right away when we look at the prophet we didn't expect but wished for, that we may not get the Messiah we wished for, or we wished for but we did not expect. And here we have in Jesus this guy. He says, yeah, I can imagine why John is wondering if Jesus is the Messiah. If all this build-up cultural stuff is there in the expectation of the wish. And Jesus is coming, and he's not doing the fiery sword thing at all. He's preaching about healing. He's preaching and inviting everyone to follow him. He is not exhorting people to violence or raising an army in that way. And so John sees these acts of healing, and Jesus kind of says, yeah, you hear about that. That's all true. Your people, messengers, have seen that for themselves. And so John then gets the message that this is the one. And he's ready to believe. Now, Jesus has this interesting moment where he kind of says, you expected the prophets a little different, didn't you, in those nice moments, right? And they are conflicted, even about John. So both these men are reaffirming what people are experiencing in prophet and Messiah. Now, Isaiah and the letter of James, our apostle there, they use an image of fire, both using images of fire to refer to the Messiah. Isaiah using fire like it's annihilation, holy annihilation, in that really kind of wicked moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark with the melting faces. Okay? That's Isaiah's image of the fire of God. Okay? And when James is writing about the fire of the Messiah, the fire of God, James is very specific. The fire doesn't come to destroy everything or destroy life. The fire for James burns away the chaff. It's very specific. Chaff is that hard little husky piece of a seed or a grain that keeps that seed or grain contained and is not able to grow. It protects it in its seed form, perhaps, but ultimately the seed needs to be planted and nurtured, and the farmer, says James, has to be patient with that process for the seed to reach its full potential, to grow into the potential of the seed. But the chaff has to be burned away first before left behind. There's an example of that for me in that process of chaff. being burned away to reach full potential. And I see that in these past couple of weeks in Nelson Mandela. I see that in spades. As we've heard more again about the biography of his life, we learn about a man who in his early adulthood was very much fighting on behalf of his people, struggling with them, and the oppression of a white minority government. And he was initially starting with the challenge of how do you do that with pacifism? How do you challenge great power and not exhort to violence? But as he more and more saw the response of the white minority government taking on great violence in the streets and to people who were unarmed, he became more challenged. People questioned, how can you remain peaceful in the face of that? How can you? You're betraying your people. And he more and more questioned that for himself and began to allow and encourage activities that would try to derail the system and ended up harming people in the process. Ultimately, he was jailed for sabotage. And he was jailed on an island, Robben Island, for 27 years. He went in at the age of 44. He lived in a cell for that time, most 18 years of that time, in a 6-foot square space. He had a roll on the floor that he slept on, a bedroll on the floor. And he had a bucket with a lid that served as his toilet. 18 years later, I was 27. And he did hard labor out in the quarters surrounding where this jail was. He went in an angry young man. And his time there basically got him into a situation where he suddenly realized, as he saw the next generation of young African men being jailed with him, they were so angry and really ready to resort to violence that they no longer agreed with what he had been seeing previously. And he found himself in this strange position of being a moderate. And he gained the respect of both his captors, the white guards, and the white government, as well as his own people gradually over time, as they heard him speak moderately about the need for reconciliation and the need to find out how we do it, how we live life as diverse communities, side by side. How do we do it in peace? Such that the white government became actually quite eager to negotiate with him to be a leader when he got out. When he was about to be released, the people were wondering, will he be the leader that takes us into a war? Some really wanted that struggle. But when he came out, he was prepared to be the leader the world needed him to be. And in fact, when they held their first democratic election and he was elected the president of that, he said in his inaugural speech, this is not a victory about a victory party. This is a victory for Africa to even have this process. And he united diverse people. But he couldn't have done that either without a maturing experience of his captivity and being challenged to work through his own process and work himself into real relationships with captors and people on the margin of violence. When we enter Advent time, we're often asking ourselves the question that the ancient Hebrews asked. We're asking ourselves, what kind of Messiah are we waiting for? What are we waiting for from God when he comes? And the Christian community asks the same question after Jesus' death. What kind Messiah, what God is coming when God returns. Certainly, the fiery Messiah that had been looked for was overturned in the innocent and very vulnerable human child that was born. And so when we ask ourselves, God, when you come and you're living into the potential of your kingdom, what is it we're wishing for? What expectations do we have of God? What are we waiting for? But I think Advent is actually another one of those things that gets turned around on us. Because God, as the farmer, that has planted the seeds in the world that are us, is waiting patiently for us to live into our potential. As Nelson Mandela did, what is it in our lives that we have yet to fulfill, to truly meet our potential? What keeps us from meeting that potential individually, as families, as communities, as nations? This Advent, God is waiting and wishing on us